Okay, so how much have you used software today? Really? Think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if we all stopped to actually count, it'd be kind of ridiculous.
From grabbing coffee to, well, listening to us right now, software's kind of running the show, right?
It really is.
But, and this is where things get interesting, have you ever thought about what happens when that software, well, fails?
That's what we're going deep on today.
Exactly. And we've got an awesome source to guide us. Chapter 1 of Secure and Resilient Software Development.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll not just know how software fails, you'll understand the impact, like the real-world effects on all of us.
And we're not just talking computers crashing here. This stuff's in everything.
Cars, medical devices, even things like ATMs.
The book actually says, as a society, we basically need software to function now.
It's true.
Ah,
It's easy to forget just how deeply embedded software is in, well, practically everything these days.
they've got this great analogy in the book about a supermarket. Like, imagine it's Sunday morning, everyone's doing their grocery shopping.
And suddenly, all the checkout systems crash.
Chaos. Utter chaos.
People would be freaking out, right?
For sure. And that's just groceries. Think about a company like Amazon. Their website goes down, even for a short time.
Millions, potentially, in lost revenue.
Exactly. So the potential for disruption is huge, and that's where this idea of software resilience comes in.
The book actually quotes the National Infrastructure Advisory Council, they call resilience, the ability to anticipate, absorb, adapt to, and quickly recover from disruptive events.
So it's not just about preventing failures outright, it's about being prepared when they do happen, minimizing the impact.
Right, like having a backup generator at home just in case the power goes out.
Exactly. But here's the scary part. Vulnerabilities in software are, well, they're everywhere.
And the numbers are actually pretty shocking. Back in 1998, CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team, they reported something like 262 software vulnerabilities.
Okay, 262, that's a lot, but manageable, right?
Yeah, well, fast forward to 2008, that number jumps to over 6,000.
Whoa, okay, that's a huge GE increase. So maybe a dumb question, but for those of us who aren't, like, coding wizards, what is a vulnerability exactly?
Think of it as a weakness in the code, a way in that attackers can use to, I don't know, disrupt the system, get access, things like that.
Okay, so a vulnerability is like an unlocked door.
And there are people out there constantly looking for those open doors.
That's kind of terrifying, honestly. And speaking of scary stuff, the book has some pretty chilling examples of how these vulnerabilities can play out in the real world. Starting with something you might not expect, an old Nokia 1100 phone.
Yeah, you wouldn't think an older device like that would be a target, but it shows how security flaws can persist in, technology that we often overlook.
Right, we think, oh, it's old, no one cares about it anymore.
In this case, criminals were able to use a software flaw to intercept text messages, even ones with banking passwords in them.
So an old phone becomes a tool for cybercrime.
Exactly.
Crazy. But it's not just older tech that's vulnerable, right? The book also mentions Charlie Miller's iPhone hack.
Yeah, he was able to take control of a phone remotely using just text messages.
It seems like no matter how advanced tech gets, there's always a way in.
It's a constant back and forth.
And then there's the Toyota Prius had a software glitch that caused cars to stall, sometimes even at highway speeds.
Which is obviously incredibly dangerous.
And then this one hits close to home for me because even Steve Wozniak, Apple co-founder, he had a similar issue with his Prius, sudden acceleration.
It makes you think twice about how much we trust software, right?
Oh, seriously, especially when our safety is on the line. But it gets even more serious. The source mentions the multi-data systems radiation therapy devices.
A software error led to patients getting too much radiation.
Some even died as a result.
It's a tragic example of just how high the stakes can be.
Absolutely. And it shows how important robust security is, especially in systems that can directly impact people's lives.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've talked about vulnerabilities in general, but let's get specific. The book talks about the Heartland Payment Systems hack, a massive credit card theft.
Millions of cards were stolen, all because of a technique called SQL injection.
Which sounds super technical. What actually happened?
Basically, the attackers found a way to manipulate the website's database to steal information.
Sneaky.
And what's really alarming is they tested their attack against all the common antivirus programs to make sure it wouldn't get detected.
So this wasn't just some random hacker, they were organized.
Absolutely.
And the source also talks about some findings from IBM's 2008 security report.
It wasn't a pretty picture. They found that the number of vulnerabilities was increasing year after year.
So it's not just that they exist, it's that they're becoming more common.
Right. And not only were there more vulnerabilities, but they were also becoming more severe.
Meaning they had the potential to cause even more damage.
Exactly.
But what really shocked me was that a huge percentage of these vulnerabilities, especially web applications, didn't have any patches available.
Meaning there was no easy
So
fix.
even when solutions exist, they're not always being implemented quickly enough.
It leaves systems vulnerable for way too long.
Okay, so we've talked about the what of vulnerabilities, but I'm curious about the why. Why is software so flawed in the first place?
The book points to one major issue. A lot of programmers simply don't have enough security training.
It's like expecting someone to drive a car without ever having taken a lesson.
Exactly. And on top of that, programmers are under a lot of pressure to, work fast, meet deadlines, get new features out there.
So security gets pushed to the side.
Often, yes.
And let's not forget that software development is global now. The code for your banking app, for example, could have been written by anyone, anywhere.
You really have no idea what their level of expertise is.
It's mind-boggling. But we tend to focus on the technical side, the code, and vulnerabilities. I think we forget about the real-world costs of insecure software.
Absolutely. We often hear about data breaches and financial losses, but it goes much deeper than that.
The book uses the example of Dwelling House Savings and Loan, a really old institution, over 100 years old. They had to shut down after cyber thieves stole a lot of their assets.
It wasn't just about the money, it was the collapse of an institution, a loss of trust within the community.
And then there's the impact on us, the consumers. Breaches like the ones at Monster.com and RBS WorldPay. Millions of people's data was exposed.
It makes you think twice about entering your credit card info online.
It definitely does. It erodes trust, not just in specific companies, but in the whole system.
For sure.
And then there's the Kennedy Space Center. I mean, if any place should be secure, it's that, right?
But even they got hacked.
And there were suspicions of foreign governments being involved.
Makes you realize the scale of the problem.
Before we wrap up this part, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the connection between security and resilience.
Right. The book argues that if we focus on core security principles, we build stronger systems overall.
Okay, but just to be clear, what are those principles?
Well, there are three main ones: confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Break those down for me. What do they actually mean?
Sure. Confidentiality is about making sure that information is only accessed by the people who are supposed to see it. Like, think of it as locking your front door or having a strong password.
Okay, so controlling access, keeping things private. What about integrity?
Integrity is about protecting information from being changed without permission. Imagine someone tampering with a document that's a violation of integrity.
Got it. So it's about making sure information stays accurate, trustworthy. And what about availability? That one's always tripped me up.
Availability is all about making sure that systems and information are accessible when you need them. Like, if you're trying to check your bank account and the website's down, that's a failure of availability.
So it's about keeping the lights on, so to speak, making sure things are up and running.
Exactly. And when you focus on these three principles, you create a much stronger base for secure and reliable software.
This is fascinating. I already feel like I'm looking at my phone differently.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
There's still so much more to unpack, though.
Definitely. When we come back, we'll keep exploring what it means to live in this software-driven world and what we can do to make it more secure. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive exploring the sometimes shaky ground of software.
I don't know about you, but after that last part, I'm definitely a little more aware of how much we just kind of trust software to work.
Right. It's easy to forget just how much we depend on it until something goes wrong.
And all of this, by the way, it's based on Chapter 1 of Secure and Resilient Software Development, in case you're just joining us.
Great book, even if you're, not super techie. Really
Yeah.
makes you think about software in a whole new way.
Okay, so quick recap. We talked about how software is basically everywhere, the rising number of vulnerabilities, and some pretty scary examples of what happens when those vulnerabilities get exploited.
But the book makes a really interesting point about how we need to shift our thinking about software, like fundamentally.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What do you mean?
It's not just about fixing individual bugs here and there. It's about recognizing that software is the foundation of how our world works now.
I see what you mean. It's like we've built this amazing digital world, but on top of maybe a not-so-stable base.
Exactly.
And the book argues that the folks who can make that base stronger are, the programmer, right?
The people writing the code, absolutely.
But we talked about how a lot of programmers don't have enough security training.
It's a big issue. And it's not that they're intentionally trying to create bad software, it's that they might not even know how to build in security from the start.
Right. It's like you don't just hand someone a hammer and say, go build a house
Yeah.
without teaching them like basic construction, right?
Exactly. You need the knowledge, the right tools, the whole thing.
And then there's the pressure, right? On programmers to work fast, meet deadlines, all of that.
It creates this tension between speed and security.
But as we've seen, ignoring security can have, well, pretty disastrous results down the line.
And not just data breaches and financial losses, which are bad enough. We have to think about the impact on people's lives.
Right. Like imagine a software glitch in a self-driving car
Could be fatal
or a vulnerability in a medical device.
and puts patients at risk.
Or what if like a communication system gets hacked and emergency services can't coordinate a response?
The stakes are incredibly high.
So it's not just theoretical, this stuff matters.
Definitely. And that's why the book argues for a total shift in how we approach software development. Security can't be an afterthought. It has to be baked in from the initial design all the way to the end.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we actually do that? Like go from move fast and break things to build it right, build it secure?
It's a big question, and one we'll definitely be exploring more in future deep dives. But the book does give us a starting point by focusing on those core security principles we talked about earlier.
Right, confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Exactly.
And I think it helps to think about them in a practical way, not just as like tech jargon.
For sure.
So let's say we're building a new banking app for mobile phones.
Okay, good example.
How would we use those principles to make sure it's secure, resilient?
All right, so let's start with confidentiality. In a banking app, we absolutely need to make sure only the right people can see sensitive information, like your account balance, transaction history, all of that.
So strong passwords, that kind of thing.
More than that, actually, multi-factor authentication, where you need more than just a password to log in.
Extra layers of security.
Exactly. And you also need to protect the data as it travels between the app and the bank's servers. Encryption, basically. So even if someone intercepts it, they can't read it.
It's like putting that information in a locked box before sending it out.
Great analogy.
Okay, what about integrity? How do we apply that to our app?
So with integrity, it's about making sure that transactions are accurate, that no one can mess with the data. You might use digital signatures to verify that a transaction is legit and have really good auditing systems so you can track any changes.
Like a paper trail, but digital. Okay, that makes sense. And then availability. How do we make sure our banking app is always there when people need it?
This one's super important. You'd need backup servers, redundant systems, so even if one thing goes down, the app keeps working.
Like a safety net.
Right. And you'd also need protection against denial of service attacks, where someone tries to flood the system with traffic, basically overloading it.
So like making sure the bank doors stay open, even if there's a huge crowd trying to get in.
Exactly. So you can see it's a multi-layered approach.
It's not just one thing, it's a whole bunch of things working together.
Right. And it's going to be different for every system depending on the type of data, the risks involved, all of that.
Okay, so those are the principles, but it sounds like building secure software is more than just following a checklist.
Absolutely. It's about understanding those principles and applying them thoughtfully in each situation.
So less about rules, more about understanding the bigger picture.
Exactly. And security is not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Right, because technology changes all the time. New threats pop up.
It's an ongoing process, adapting and refining your security measures.
Almost like an arms race.
You could say that, yeah,
Yeah.
but it's not just about technical solutions either.
What else is it about then?
It's about building a whole culture of security. Everyone involved, the programmers, managers, executives, they all need to understand why this is so important.
So it's a collective effort.
It is. We need to be more aware of the risks, more proactive about security, and, honestly, more willing to invest the time and resources to do it right.
I think that's a really important point. It's an investment.
It is.
Okay, this has been another like eye-opening segment. I'm starting to really get the bigger picture here.
It's a complex topic for sure, but understanding these basics is important for anyone who uses technology, which is, well, pretty much everyone.
That's true. But before we wrap up this part, I'm curious, what do you do to stay safe online? Like any personal tips you can share?
It's a great question, and one I think we should all be asking ourselves more often.
All right, welcome back for the final part of our deep dive. We've gone deep on software failures, the tech stuff, the impact. It's a lot to process, right?
It really is. I think what's become clear is that, social security, it's not just a tech issue. It affects all of us.
For sure. So As we wrap things up, we want to kind of shift the focus to you, the listener.
Because ultimately, all this info, all this knowledge, it's
Mhm.
only useful if we actually use it.
Exactly. We've talked about how software is everywhere, how much we rely on it. Now we want you to think about how knowing that changes things. For you,
It's easy to just use technology without really thinking about, I don't know, the people behind it, the decisions they made.
we just click, swipe, scroll, don't even realize how complex it all is.
But there are real people writing that code, making those choices that affect how safe and reliable that software is.
And those choices, they can have a real impact on our lives.
So we have to be more aware, more engaged with the tech we use.
Next time you hit a glitch, a website crashes, or you hear about another security breach, try to see it differently.
It's not just an annoyance, it's a symptom of this whole system we've built.
Ask yourself, what role do I play in this? What can I do to be a more responsible user?
Maybe it's choosing better passwords, using two-factor authentication, things like that.
Maybe it's being more careful about the apps you download, the websites you visit.
Or even speaking up, demanding more transparency from the companies who make the software we depend on.
All great steps we can take as individuals. But if you're someone who actually works on software, whether you're coding, managing, whatever your role,
We really want to encourage you to prioritize security and resilience right from the start.
like we said before, it's much easier to build a solid foundation than to try and fix it later when things start falling apart.
Think back to that supermarket analogy. You want those checkout lines to stay up and running no matter what.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, our big takeaway question for you is this. Knowing how much we rely on software, how does this change things for you?
What new questions come up for you about your work, your life, how you use technology?
We've dug into the why of software failures. Hopefully this gets you thinking about the how, about building more secure systems.
Because at the end of the day, we're all part of this. The more we understand, the better we can make things.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating conversation.
We hope it's been insightful and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep questioning the code.